and get started. It's about 2:02. And this is I believe, our third session of the AALS summer webinar series for technology, law, and legal education. And today we're going to have a wonderful presentation by Bill Bailey, Professor Bill Bailey. And the title of the presentation, as you know, is Teaching Visualized Legal Writing, Time to Take Off the Stylistic Straitjacket of Convention. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Bill. He's a professor of practice from the University of Washington School of Law, and he has a combined criminal civil trial practitioner career with legal scholarship and teaching. He has long been interested in research on behavioral psychology, communication strategy, and brain function. His research and writing have focused on using images, words, and stories to influence thought and decisions. And today, he will discuss multiple options for teaching technology competency skills, from resource-like training programs to easy structural course modifications to developing your own for-credit technology competency courses. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Bill, but I want to remind everyone that we're going to be taking questions immediately after his presentation. If you want to type questions in the discussion, in the chat box, I will raise them with Bill when he's done. So without further ado, go ahead and take it away, Bill.
Thanks very much, Jean. Hi, everybody. Thanks very much for tuning in. It's an honor to be here. We're all trying to cope with all the changes that are coming at us constantly. I'm going to look at the writing piece today, giving you some background on why visual writing makes sense, and then describe to you how I have woven it into my teaching here at the University of Washington. But we start out with, we're traditionalists, and I'm constantly reminded by my spouse of that, how resistant I am to change, but we're defined by a literary and an oral tradition, not a visual one. So the spoken and written word are our stock and trade. But we're up against a new world now that has put all the familiar rules in constant flux. And it's landed on our doorstep, and we're not quite sure how to deal with it. And the law and legal education in particular have lagged behind in adopting new technology. We use it for emails, we use it for research, we use it for writing, but the persuasion and influencing part of technology we don't use so well. This is a quote from my old friend Marshall McLuhan. This ancient book I got in my second year of college, and McLuhan became one of my guides in terms of how you connect with people. And this quote made a lot of sense to me then, back in the 60s. It makes a lot of sense to me now. We're in an age of anxiety. We're trying to do today's job with yesterday's tools. Imagination is one of the things we need to develop a new style in the new world. Though we are still wedded to paper in the law, one of the few professions that still use a lot of paper, documents themselves are electronic. And PDFs are how judges look on briefs now in most courts, and they're pretty frustrating to read, not as easy as paper documents. And the age-old tradition of putting visuals at the end makes them lost. Judges have told me it's just too frustrating to keep going back and forth in the PDF, scrolling to the end, coming back to the text. So the old method is not working here. Well, in 2014, my very creative, brilliant colleague here, Elizabeth Porter, wrote this article in the Columbia Law Review And this was her theme, that we're trapped in a stylistic straitjacket. The rest of the world is changing and we aren't. So that became one of my organizing principles as a teacher. How could I take everything I know and help my students and help myself take off that straitjacket? Because I am an ardent disciple of Professor Porter's, and this is this was a full color law review article in the Columbia Law Review. And this was one of the cases Professor Porter had. The Dallas Mavericks majority owner filed a brief for summary judgment on a mismanagement claim. It had one image. It was this, the Dallas Mavericks winning the NBA trophy. And guess what? That was good enough for the federal judge. Case dismissed. So I'm not going to go on at great length about psychology because we are law professors, but we do need to know that our electronic devices have changed the way our brains receive and process information. And I go back to my film studies earlier. The great Kurosawa, one of the great directors of all time, talks about we human beings are incapable of true impartiality. It's all in the eyes of the beholder. Electronic media have created this expectation that part of every message will be visual. If we go on the internet and look for information, unless it's a pure scholarly article, it's going to have visuals. We're used to seeing them on the small screen. And one of the biggest changes in my lifetime is how the iPhone and its other similar devices have totally changed people. The statistics are mind-boggling, how much time people spend on these devices. We need go no further than our houses or walking out on the street. Everybody's on their phone hours a day, and this is on the upswing. The research shows that a dependency has formed here where people feel, I don't need to pay attention to what Bailey's saying, because if I really need to know, I'll look it up on my phone later. So we have all of this faith that our phone will get us to where we need to be. And it's kind of humbling. I don't know if any of you have ever gone into a colleague's classroom to just observe a lecture, to learn how they're doing it. I get to see the back of the students' screens, and I see some playing online poker or shopping for shoes. I mean, it's multitasking is ingrained now. I don't know if Stephen Colbert realized what he was launching in 2005 in his maiden voyage for the Colbert Report when he talked about truthiness. But Google truthiness, he has now been blessed with all of these scholarly articles analyzing the core wisdom of truthiness. And I'm one that believes that we go with what's in our gut because it feels right. So bottom line here, 21st century people, all of us are distracted. There are much more complex ways of telling, learning, and knowing. And the traditional ways are not working nearly as well in terms of the written product. So focus now on judges. They make the decisions. They are the powerful people. They are the ones we bow down to, and the trial bar, they are the ones as teachers that we look to. What did they say in this case? What do they want from us? And what influences them the most? Well, a professor of the psych department here shamed me. I called her up. She's an expert on decision making. I wanted some help. You're an expert in this field. What should I be reading? So the first question she asked me, have you read Daniel Kahneman? And of course, I knew he was top of the New York Times bestseller list, but I had to fess up. I'm sorry, I haven't. I've read Malcolm Gladwell. She said, tisk, tisk, not good enough. Well, I'm glad she shamed me. This has changed my life as a teacher, as a thinker. And He is indeed worthy of his Nobel Prize on how people make decisions. We look for the path of least resistance, no matter how well educated we are. And there are two systems that drive how we think. I like the simplicity of Kahneman's work because I can comprehend two systems. System one, fast, intuitive, emotional. And this is what largely defines all of us. But as he points out, we dress it up afterwards with logic. We convince ourselves, I arrived at this in a very rational way. So that's where system two comes in. It's slower, it's more logical, and it's who we think we are, but actually we're more system one. So how about judges? They're different than us. They wear black robes. They're a breed apart. Are they immune? Well, this brilliant article in 2007 in Cornell answers that question. I don't know how the authors got 295 Florida trial judges to take psychological tests, but they did. And I'm glad because I'm a data-driven guy. And so they had the judges take this cognitive reflection test that distinguishes intuitive from deliberative decision-making. And then they compared the results to other professional groups. So how did our judges do? Not so well. The questions aren't difficult, but most of the judges got them wrong because they chose the intuitive answer. And what's more, they thought, this is a pretty easy test. I just breezed through that one. Well, that's the core problem that we have with human decision making. And this was particularly interesting to me. Gender, age, experience, political party, none of that affected the results. Gut processors are gut processors, no matter what their demographics are. I love this quote by my friend Judge Downing: judges like oysters, feeding on what floats by them. Well, what do they feed on? Judge Posner, the king of the hill, 40 books, the most cited legal scholar in the United States. Surely Judge Posner is not going to look on the internet for information, right? Wrong. Even he has fessed up that he's looked up information on WebMD. He did footnote it in a decision, but if Judge Posner is surfing the internet, everyone else is doing it too. And in commenting on that in the University of Michigan Law Review article, Judge Sutton, and commenting on Judge Posner's book, How Judges Think, drew the obvious conclusion: hey, we wear black robes, but we are human beings, and we have the same intuitions and preferences as everyone else. Thank you, Judge Sutton, proving my hypothesis that Kahneman is right. This applies to judges. And let's shift to our beleaguered state court, trial court judges. Judge Dury, now retired as a mediator, and is a mediator, is one of California's top trial judges. She's written a number of books herself. And this is what she has to say about the briefs that landed in her department. It's notoriously dull, difficult to read, and detailed. So judges are not liking what we're sending them. And it doesn't matter, California, New York. Judge Lippman was featured in a New York Times article a ways back. And it's the same pile of paper, no matter where the judge is. And state courts, trial courts, just don't have the help. And even at the federal level, there is pushback. This was a 2016 New York Times article where federal courts are giving us a message: the briefs are too long, there's too many words. And this is a sign from the judges that the world has changed. So this is not very elegant, but sci-fi writer Andy Weir's approach to his book, The Martians, sort of defines my own approach to technology. Get into the science, get into the research, what's going on here. And this is the story behind my new book on visual writing. But this is from an old book, Strunk and White, Elements of Style. My high school English teacher drilled it into my head. And this quote at the beginning, readers are in the dark. They need our help to explain things. And even though this seems very logical, judges tell me we are not very good explainers. We don't help them. So you can see this is a long time ago. You look at me 30 years ago, you look at me now, the years may not have been kind, but here I am back as a civil trial attorney. And this is when I started doing visual briefing. So I put this photo in there so you could see it was a long time ago. And I started in the morning paper, I would see these tremendous graphics. On front page news stories, I looked at the artist named Dwayne Hoffman, and I thought, this is tremendous. I don't even need to read the article. I just look at Dwayne's graphics and it tells me everything. So I called him up, realizing that newspaper people are not paid what they're worth. I said, Dwayne, you want to moonlight for me? He said, yeah. And a beautiful relationship was formed because I figured we are storytellers in the law, and we have more complicated stories to tell. So why not make it simple? Why not serve up the path of least resistance? So from then on, Dwayne and I are partners, and I still use his work here in teaching. And okay, so I know we have evidence scholars out there. All right, Bailey, great, be creative, but you're going to hit a brick wall with the judges. Wrong. They liked it. Because it was more fun to read. And here's a smiling judge that was on one of my cases in practice, and my opponent brought a motion to strike all of my illustrations from the brief. And they were under 403. And Judge Shushkoff said, you know, your argument here is that this stuff is too powerful. And my opponent said, yeah. He said, good luck. That's what a lawyer is supposed to do. So I started writing articles in practitioner magazines, reporting what the reaction I was getting. A picture is worth 1,000 words, and even 1,000 words will not accurately describe a place like a photo can. So it's very important to orient the reader to place. And I started doing that in all of my briefs with illustrations like this. Experts are the tyranny of experts define our work in practice, and their opinions are not the most scintillating. So I started coming up with information, graphics like concrete pumping, and the judge would much rather look at this, get it right away, than go through pages and pages of depositions and things about concrete pumping. So I came here in 2011, and I started teaching my students to write like this because the feedback from judges was tremendous, both in my career and here. I do not want to give bad information, none of us do, to our students. So I'm always checking this out with federal and state judges. And because I don't appear in court anymore, I'm a teacher, they'll talk to me. And every last one of them. And when I had a guest column in the ABA Journal on November 30th last year on the new book, I heard from federal and state judges all over the country saying, we like this approach. It makes our jobs easier. So we go to the science on influence. In my research, I see other professions really looking at the persuasion piece through writing. We don't. But if you go and just do a cursory glance on the research, like Dr. Boholm in Sweden says, visuals exert a positioning power. They reinforce authenticity. People will quibble with words, not with images. And as I mentioned a moment ago, images tell us exactly what the scene looks like. They describe things so we get it right away. Words don't. Dr. Pavio talks about pictures are easier to code in our brain and much easier to retrieve. So that all-important readability factor that we look for enhanced, And the trialer and me love this. You get two scoops of information, two scoops of influence for the same information, show the picture, say the word. So you get the double down. It doesn't count against you for repetitiveness. Here is a researcher we all need to know. And people in marketing and influence professions are all over Dr. Newman. That's how I found out about her. She's at Australia National University. And she has proven through a series of really fun psych experiments that adding a photo to any written claim immediately reinforces credibility and that people are unaware that this is happening. In fact, they deny that it's happening. Here's a sample from one of Dr. Newman's studies. Giraffes can't jump. I'm willing to buy in. They're kind of big and cumbersome. If I was a giraffe, I can't jump very well anyhow. But actually they can jump, but if you show people the photo and say they can't jump, huge buy-in. Photos increase the ease that we process information. So for a beleaguered trial judge, ease of processing the answer to their prayers, they make the information feel right. The Colbert truthiness thing, it just feels right. If it's easier to digest, we're more likely to believe it. And this part, we never want to admit we've been influenced by a picture, but time and time again, Dr. Newman has proved that people are. So we obviously can't be putting in trick pictures in a brief because our reputation is done forever. And I make a big point of foundation with my students, but if you do your homework and you use a solid image, you're going to be way ahead of the game. There are other less fun articles than Dr. Newman's that talk about the same thing. Readers rate technical and scientific articles more highly if they have graphs. Facebook posts much more likely to get shared with images, and the processing speed. Our brains just get things so much more quickly looking at an image than reading. So part of what I studied before coming to law school was film and storytelling. And every story has scenes. And that's why we start every reported case opinion with the story. Directors draw storyboards because everybody gets what they want to have happen in the film if it's already drawn out in advance. And the focus is to involve the audience in the story. Dr. Hassan of Princeton has been watched by millions and millions on TED Talks, and he talks about how getting the story in the reader's brain causes them to adopt it as the truth, as if it was their idea. So I train my students to think of cases in terms of visualized stories and scenes. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but just this always comes up. Evidentiary foundation. All right, Bailey, great, creative, wonderful, but will this pass evidentiary muster? And my answer is yes, it will. The problem is age old. Here's a quote from the ABA Journal in 1954. No guidance on this stuff. There's still no guidance, but the federal rules of evidence, one of the defining purposes was to make evidence more admissible, to trust the juries. And so what do we have? A series of low bars. FRE 401. Pretty much any visual is going to meet this. 402, all relevant evidence is admissible. And state appellate court decisions are uniformly supportive of using visuals, as long as they're accurate, relevant, and helpful. Authentication, there's a minimum prima facie showing under 901, and even computer-generated diagrams, same as photographs, same rules. So this is what I tell my students. You're an art director too, not just a writer, but you're an art director. And I tell them about the concept that in ad agencies, in newspapers, in the communication world, they think of visuals to make the message come across. So we live in a world where there are lots of options. It's easy to drop in documents, photos into documents. I have students clerking for judges who send me back, hey, I got another visual brief today. So one former student sent this to me. Google Maps gives us top-down views of an entire scene. This is from a brief I filed in practice. They illustrate and reinforce dangers in words. So much happens on phones these days, like the recent Dominion case against Fox. It was all driven by what was on people's phones. So let's put it in. But I also tell students, remember, if you deceive, you're done. Your reputation is done. So don't get carried away with yourself. Time magazine really got blasted and should have in the 90s for trying to make O.J. Simpson look more sinister by darkening the tone. These are from cases that students have pulled out from federal court. This lawyer told a consumer protection case all with documents, and it actually was interesting. Adds credibility. Visual analogies are big. This was one from a discovery motion in federal court, bob and weave. This is one of my own cases where I used a monopoly card to show that the defendant developer was creating a bunch of sham corporations. But I also showed this image to students. The National Geographic folks compressed this image on the cover. They got blasted. So they're never going to do that again. So it's got to be careful. All right, so computer graphics. This dour-looking fellow created a revolutionary way of visualizing information we use today. Otto Neurath. This was his book from 1940, and USA Today was one that picked it up in 1982 to visualize the news, making it cute and graphic. Well, meanwhile, the New York Times, we don't have to do that. USA Today isn't much of a newspaper. Well, Max Frankel describes in his book how the New York Times started losing readers, and they wanted to study how do their erudite readership look at information, and they were shocked. Even really smart people that read the New York Times like to look at the visuals. And they looked at the visual first. If they liked that, they go on and read the article. But otherwise, they wouldn't. So the Times has the message. You look at the daily or the Sunday New York Times, it's full of it. And this graphic, I'm here in William Gates Hall, this humble-looking graphic has saved millions of lives. Bill Gates thought, I'm going to wire the world, computers for everyone. And then he was reading this Nicholas Kristof article in the New York Times, and he saw this graphic. Millions of people are dying through unclean water. This launched the Gates Foundation. Nick Kristof was feeling pretty good. Hey, I wrote the article that launched the foundation, but Bill Gates, true to the reader's study, this is what did it. This is what sold it. So I exposed my students to text box kind of images to put in briefs, making the judge's life easier, comparing the precedent to the facts of the case, going down the checklist. It just makes it easier. We're in the world of big data. It's everywhere. We have ER 1006 to compress voluminous information. Nobody uses it because we don't know how to do it. So here's some examples. Discovery violations. There was a lot of procedure involved in this case. This is what the trial judge used to make her decision. This graphic was in a products case, condensing lots of information. So images bring the case to life. I'm going to zip through this. This is one of my last cases before I came here. Client fell, badly hurt, and I went to the scene with her and with my illustrator, and this is the brief. It shows how she fell. And this proves that it's all accurate. So there it is. And this demonstrates how she fell. So how do we teach this stuff? To land with impact, number one, we have to think of judges as real people. And I know that sounds kind of dumb to say that, but we don't. I looked at myself, I was just thinking of them as abstractions. So what are the case facts that students need to visualize? First, I tell them, start thinking visually. And I am the world's worst artist. My skill peaked at age 5. I can't even draw a good stick figure, but I know what the evidence shows and how the visual put it across. So I work with students on image selection. And because our books don't have any images, I needed to find an alternative universe. So having been in practice a long time, I have cases with volumes of images, which I have expanded. And so I give them a world where they have to make choices. And they can add to the choices I've given them. But this file has a broad number of images. So I teach them basic layout. And the first thing is always a timeline. It helps us to follow things sequentially. It helps the lawyer or the student to get the story straight. And you can make it, of course, pretty if you want. When do we use pictures? Because I'm trying to inform their judgment. This is new stuff. You set the scene, basic concepts when you want to show emotion, because you want to make that story easier. There's leveling and sharpening. How much detail do you want to put? And less is often more. Simplicity is a virtue. But again, getting back to foundation, because Dwayne Hoffman was trained in the news business, he has a very high standard for accuracy. So I can always compare the photo to the illustration. And you see the overhead photo compared to what Dwayne did. It has a lot of extraneous information filtered out. That's really not important. So, all right, so here are some graded papers of students. Oftentimes they use the wrong image. It doesn't show what they want. Here, the student didn't have the bicyclist that was hit in the image. So we used the wrong one. This is the one they should have used. Here, the student was trying to show damage to the vehicle, high speed, when she should have used this image. Captions are the biggest problem. People struggle with writing a caption. So I get down to elementary caption writing. Double check the facts, be descriptive, what's going on, avoid stating the obvious. So here are some examples from my students, adding gratuitous things. Here the viewer can see, look at this mind-boggling length of this caption. They're always way too long, not pointed enough. So captions are a real problem. And identifying what's here in the illustration, who are the characters, where are they, and using arrows, using circles. We're not graphic designers, but we need design balance to show in the brief how things are weighted against one another. So here's one I got this past quarter from a student. Holy cow, too much of a good thing jammed in there. So I worked with her on balance and what really matters. And image stacking. This is like too much. We give up. If there's not text, it's words and images. So you get the point, too much going on. And I get into the supporting images with the text. It's the two together, words and images. Either one apart is not as effective without the other. So you see that message over and over again. So this student blended the two really well together. Image size is another issue. I remind students that judges are older like me, so you don't want things too tiny. You want the print and the image to be good. Sequencing. Here was, in this case, the Google Maps is really important to the defense, but this student put it way back at the end. I said, you got to put it up front where it's going to help you. That's the key part of your argument. Don't bury the lead. I also encourage them to drop in phones where the message is important to the case, but it's in the wrong place. So bottom line, words and images together light up the brain. Words alone don't. And Alvin Toffler's Future Shock was a bestseller in 1970. It's still applicable today. And this is a slogan that I live by. The illiterate of the 21st century are going to be those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And part of being a teacher, one of the wonderful things is it's constant learning and re-examining what we once thought was true. And I'm shifting to questions now, but I want to let you know that my publisher, when I told her how important this was and what a great series, they said, all right, if any of the faculty in attendance want a free copy of the book, just have them contact this email address and it will be yours. So there you have it. I wanted to end sooner than this, but I would love to take questions if there are any.
Thank you so much, Bill. This is really fascinating, considering the human evolution from pictures to written text and now back to pictures. I mean, definitely there is something about things that are illustrated as opposed to written. So there's a couple of questions that have already surfaced. And the first one is, will competition judges be ready for this change? So a lot of law students are in competitions. Is this something that they're going to be ready for?
The short answer to that question is yes. Getting back to Kahneman, all people are the same. We like to see stuff for ourselves. And so the problem for students, I tell them, find something good on the internet that you can use as illustrative. Obviously, the things that I spend a lot of money on in practice won't happen, but moot court judges are the same as judges in real life. And my experience is they really like this. It makes it easier. Jane, you're muted.
I do that a lot. All right. Victoria Sutton has just mentioned that she wrote an article on how to assess law professors on visual legal scholarship, and she put the link in the chat. So if anyone wants to take a look at that, it's on SSRN. Thank you, Victoria, for sharing that. Also, we have a question from Charles Calleros, and he said, this is so appealing, but to what extent could graphics not only improve just clarity, recall, and engagement, but also accomplish persuasion through increasing judicial use of the quick form of thinking, intuition, stereotyping, and confirmation bias, especially when well-heeled clients can pay lots of money for law firms to maximize the psychological effect of terrific, carefully crafted graphics. And then the next question is, could it advance the attorney's goal of persuading at the expense of increasing the extent to which judges make decisions on the basis of intuition or even bias rather than more logical, slow thinking, and more fun for judges to read, but not necessarily better decisions or more justice? That's the question.
And
so
that is a very well-placed question. And first, I will start by saying one of the things I dabbled in was political science and seeing how propaganda has been used, whether it's Nazi Germany or in our own country, to appeal to the baser elements. And any tool can be misapplied, but I know that these tools are being used by those who are appealing to bias. And so I have found that as someone who fought passionately for clients as a public defender and in the civil justice arena, that if I'm on top of my game, having these images well thought through can bring out the best in people, but I cannot deny that there is a dark side. But whether we use this approach or not, that dark side is there. And we have lived through a time where the basest elements of human nature have been repeatedly appealed to. So that is troubling, but that notwithstanding, I have seen that this does make the justice system more just.
Yeah, thank you. There's another question. Are there any specific programs you use to create the images? Is it correct to assume that the images need to be created by the student attorney to avoid copyright issues?
Well, if there's some copyright scholars in the crowd, I may need to check in with you, but I've always taken the approach, this is fair use. And so I tell my students, you troll the internet all the time for other reasons. Now I want you to look at Google Images in a selective way to find ideas that will help you put things across in your cases. And what I try to do is connect the students' lives outside the classroom with what's happening in the classroom and in the profession. So my short answer is fair use, but I will tell you, it wasn't writing this book that drove me crazy. It was getting permissions from everything in the book. It's like, and the publisher's copyright lawyer is very sticky, but so my usual fair use didn't work here. But with photographs, they're ubiquitous, and put in a brief, I think it's pretty safe to say it's fair use.
And the next question is, do you teach or encourage your students to use graphic approaches to writing itself, e.g. flowcharts maybe? And do you see any improvements if they do this?
Yes, and thanks for asking that question, because flowcharts are simple. They're easy. You can get a template on the internet. There's lots of choices with that. And what I found is the act of filling in the flowchart makes them more coherent. It deepens the understanding. And it does that for me too, which is why I always did a timeline right out of the box in the case, because it's the foundation on which things are often built. So simple graphic devices like that are cheap, and they deepen student thought and make the final product better.
Are there any other questions? We just got a comment from Billy Joe Kaufman that it was both fascinating and extremely well done. So you have your first compliment there.
Thank you.
One thing I wanted to mention, some friends of mine just created a graphic novel on animal rights called Thing Inside the Struggle for Animal Personhood. And I was wondering what you think about using something like a graphic novel to convey images, things about the law or legal theory.
I am a huge fan, Jane, and I'm just reaching up to the shelf here. This is a wonderful book, Understanding Comics, and it goes into the psychology of what happens in graphic novels. And I'm a great believer in their value. Art Spiegelman's Mouse 1 and 2. I've read a number of books on the Holocaust, but his just has huge impact. So I see where that's going. And for those of you that get the book, you'll see in the back, I put a couple of graphic novel approaches that people have done. This got a lot of publicity. Bob Cohen, a New York lawyer, got 5 pages to do an amicus brief. And so he made national news, and this got in the ABA Journal by having his daughter, who was a film student, do it. A Texas lawyer did this horror comic complaint in a nuisance action down in Houston. And if you look at the complaint in the Dominion voting systems case and Smartmatic, it's full of links to internet clips and outside sources. So this is really happening more and more, but I'm a fan of graphic novels and what they have to teach us in terms of how you tell the story.
And the question is, who is the author for Understanding Comics?
Yes, it is Scott McCloud, McCloud. And this is a brilliant book that is one of the best storytelling books I have here on my shelf, and I have quite a few. Another book I'll just add a quick prompt for is this one called The Universal Principles of Design. And what this does in very short, it's like 2 pages, talks about Occam's razor, just all these basic principles. And what I love about this is its simplicity and accessibility. 2 pages per principle of persuasion and a visual in every one. So this book is my role model. And so what I tried to do was cross-train students, not overloading them, because they already have enough on the plate. But what I try to do is extract exactly and only what they need to know to put this all together.
Are there any more questions? We only have 2 minutes left, so. The only thing I had a question about was AI. I know that AI can now generate and manipulate images. Have you have any thoughts about how that could impact what you're talking about in terms of using graphics?
I do, and that's something I get into in my forensics course, Jane, on visual facial recognition ID, the racial biases inherent in that, and the deep fakes phenomenon. So we are going to be up against that. And the earlier question about using this stuff for sinister purposes, we have seen that over and over again. Politics was the time-honored place for visual dirty tricks, and I actually collect those in a notebook here on how distortion of images has caused people to go to the dark side. And I think in the future, for those in litigation practice, you may need a computer expert to go over something to see if it's a deep fake. So thanks for pointing that out, Jane, because one of the things I never do is overpromise. If something is illustrative, I don't make a claim that it's exactly to scale. It's meant to help the judge understand the process. So if you don't overpromise, that's good. But the manipulation and the deep fakes thing, per the O.J. Simpson issue that I mentioned in my talk, that's a growing concern, and it's harder to detect now. And really, it's out of our wheelhouse. We just have to know when to call somebody to go over it. And that's why in my forensics class, I bring computer people into the classroom to talk about what they need to look for. And if you think something's a fake, what do you do?
So there was a question about what was the second book that you showed? What was that?
Oh, the universal principles of design. And the lead author is William Lidwell, Lidwell, and Pratina Holden and Jill Butler, the 3. But this is a huge bargain. And in terms of, it's right here within easy arm's reach. So you can tell what books I really use are the ones right here in arm's reach, and the ones that are sort of lesser, well, maybe once in a while, they're out there in the outer galaxy.
Okay. If there's no more questions, we're at the end of our presentation. I want to thank you once more, Bill, for such a engaging and fascinating presentation about the use of images within litigation documents and in legal writing in general. So thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Giving a lot of thank yous in the chat as well. Some excellence and thank yous.
It's an honor to be here and check in with my colleagues. And for any of you that go down this path, I would love to hear about your experiences. I have to tell you, as a teacher, this is really fun to teach, and the students are very enthusiastic about it, and they have a huge advantage over me. They're digital natives. They know this stuff better than me. So I tell them that right out front. So go to your strength. This is how your generation communicates, and this is the way the world's going. So it's great to be here, and thank you all. I really appreciate it, and thank you, Jane.